What branch did you serve in?
I was in the Navy.
You were in the Navy.
I was.
And what years?
I graduated from University of North Carolina in 1952 and had been accepted for officer candidate school immediately thereafter. And so I expected to go on to active duty in August of that year, 1952. But I got orders to report in June. So instead of having a whole summer right here, I had about a week. But I reported in June to Officer Candidate School, which at that time was in Newport, Rhode Island. It has now moved to Georgia. But anyway, when I went there, it was at Newport. And that was a short course. It was 60 days, 2 months. And I was there, I think, actually for 61 or 63 days or something like that before I went on to active duty at my next station. So that was the story. In 1952, I joined the Navy as a seaman recruit and went to Officer Candidate School, where we remained seaman recruit until we were graduated from there. So in August of that year, I was graduated from Officer Candidate School. Then what happened?
As not a second lieutenant, as an ensign.
Yeah, congratulations is right. That was a big day.
And so what was your job in the Navy?
When I left Officer Candidate School as a second lieutenant, I was then shipped off to Bayonne, New Jersey, where the Navy Supply Corps School was stationed. And I lived on Staten Island with other roommates and went from Staten Island to Bayonne to the naval base for classes in the Supply Corps School. And that lasted, I think probably, Emily, I remember a couple of months, probably another 60 days, more or less, before I was then assigned to a destroyer in Newport, Rhode Island. So I went from OCS to Naval Supply Corps School to my first duty assignment at sea aboard the USS Hazelwood, which was a World War II destroyer, still in service, obviously. It had been updated a bit, but it was pretty much like it was in World War II. It had 3 gun turrets and a bunch of torpedoes and a bunch of depth charges. And the crew was not wartime competent by a long shot, maybe half of wartime competent. So aboard that ship, I was the supply officer, which meant I was in charge of paying the crew, feeding the crew, had a ship store for the crew, and I liked to tell my enlisted men and others that served under me that we were the morale booster aboard the ship. Because if things went awry, if they didn't like the food, if the ship store was out of caramel candy, which I'll tell you about later, and other things, the morale would drop quickly. So I think it's the Supply Corps, the S Division, they called it aboard ship, was really an important part of the ship's functioning. Keep the morale up and you have a better functioning crew. So that was sort of my message to my people that reported to me.
Now my next question, so when you went to Korea, where were you?
Where what?
So when you deployed to Korea, where on the peninsula were you?
At sea. We were never on the peninsula, fortunately. When we left Newport to be assigned to Westpac, the Western Pacific,
right.
That was a great trip. I ought to slip that in. We went from Newport to Norfolk, Virginia, where we picked up a contingent of naval airmen they flew like you were going to do. And they were aboard the ship as we came around Cape Hatteras and other places at sea, and we saw one of them the entire trip. The others were so sick, so seasick, that they literally could not leave their bunks until we got to Key West, and then they blossomed. So anyway, we picked those guys up and delivered them to Key West. And then we went through the Panama Canal and then up the west coast to San Diego. We spent Christmas in San Diego, which was not bad. And I called home and let people know I was happy. We lost a man overboard between Panama and San Diego because the seas were so rough